Probably be the shortest one that you've seen all day. I think I have about 20, 25 minutes max. Take questions afterwards. Get everybody out to the casino floor where you'd rather be. Just kidding. My name is Vadon Wil. The topic of this presentation is more like a PSA for organizations that have no dedicated security staff, or maybe they do, but they don't have a formulated IR plan or don't really have experience responding to incidents. It's most likely going to be received as a PSA for those types of companies. For those of you that work at large companies that have dedicated security staff, routinely handle incidents, some of this stuff's going to be, pretty lame for you. But to back up, so the whole idea behind this talk is, as perimeter security, we do a lot of incident response and digital forensic cases, everything from supporting civil litigation in a court, in any kind of civil court case. We may do e-discovery. We may go in and just snatch evidence on a court order where we just get what we can. We also do quite a bit of incident response for mid-level companies that never think about this prior to their hair being on fire. We find very regularly that there are some very basic things they can do to prepare for a potential incident. We have some historical data to show that pretty much everybody's going to get breached. Everybody already knows that. A lot of these companies may be run by civilian boards, such as banks. They may be run by IT folks that have just been admins their whole life and have never really put any emphasis on security. So that's kind of the whole topic here. My name is Vadon Wil. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. I've been in InfoSec since 1998. Right out of high school in 1991, I joined the Army Reserves, did that whole thing. I became a state trooper in Oklahoma in 1995. My rookie year was when the bomb went off downtown. I did that for 5 years and decided I was tired of fighting for my paycheck. And like every other cop that I knew at the time, and you probably know now, you have to have a second job to support yourself. I was lucky enough at the time that in Oklahoma City, AOL, if you remember them, had opened a call center. And they were hiring just about anybody that could answer a phone and figure out how to read a script and click some buttons. So they taught me how to be that dreaded help desk guy at the other end of the phone at AOL. So what was cool about that is I would come in off of my shift, full trooper uniform, gun, everything, walk right in, badge in, sit down at the desk, take my hat off and dial up and start talking to people all over the United States that hated their product as much as I did. So I was grateful for that opportunity because it gave me an opportunity to make money, and it also got me out of law enforcement, which oddly enough, my career choices down the road have put me right back into supporting law enforcement and training with law enforcement and all that. So it's been kind of a really cool full circle thing. But so I got into IT in 1998. I've worked for, Build-A-Bear Workshops, corporate headquarters as IT guy, network engineer, that sort of stuff. I cut my teeth in networking there. I've worked for MasterCard's corporate headquarters down at the data center in O'Fallon on the central site engineering team. I got into the dark side of IT, I call it, DFIR, back in 2006, and worked for a small company called Aspirian Computer Forensics out of Chesterfield. The owner of that company really put a lot of effort and money into training me up to be a really good DFIR guy. He ultimately retired and sold me that company, which I owned until December of last year. Parameter acquired me, and now I'm the director of DFIR for Parameter. So I've got a lot of experience in the digital forensic side and incident response side, hardly any red team side. But the focus that I've always, that I've always had is on the blue team side, and I really love it. Like the red team side stuff, you guys think are cool, but after the fact, trying to piece the puzzle pieces together is where my brain really kicks in. So getting into this, that's a little bit about me, but getting into the whole point of this thing. So 71% of companies have said they've been breached, and this is probably a BS number because that's the 71% that decided they were going to actually admit they were breached, right? Out of 1,200 companies. This is just from a survey that I pulled up to kind of get some perspective on how often companies do get breached. So we know it's coming. Everybody knows it's coming. If you're not preparing for that eventuality, you're just already failing your incident response that's going to inevitably happen down the road. Typically, 191 days is the average length of time before somebody realizes that they've been breached. The problem with that is that that's an average. So there's plenty of cases where it's more than 191 days. Personally, we've had cases where, in fact, I just had one recently where we finally figured out where patient 0 was, and we were able to pull from the master file tables malicious file entries dating back 2 years. But they only realized they had a breach because that one was far gone and a new one started up. And they happen to have some stuff in place to kind of give them a little bit of visibility on that. And so anyway, as I'm saying, it could be here already. And if you're not taking steps to prepare for it, you're already losing. 66 days is the average for pulling out of a data breach and patching that up and remediating it. That I've seen longer in some of our cases. We've seen some, where it's a pretty easy fix. And then the organization's really small, so it's easy to get them fixed up in 30 days, but 66 days. We've had them over 100 days before. And the last boring stat slide that you'll see, 77%, that's 3/4 of all companies that are surveyed out of 2,800 say they don't even have an incident response plan. Incident response plans can range from everything from something ad hoc where your plan is call your vendor, like Parameter, and say, hey, we got a problem, come in here and unscrew this situation for us. All the way to a dedicated resource chart, who's going to be notified, all the way through to media and press, depending on how large your organization is and what your reporting requirements are. What I find interesting about this stat is that even the people that have an incident response plan, they don't even use it. They dust it off when something happens. We come across that quite a bit where, I had a company, I'll tell you, I'm not going to name any companies in here because who knows who's in the room, right? But we had a company with an IR plan. They got hit, they dusted it off, and the turnover rate at that company was so great over the last couple of years that nobody in the plan even worked there anymore, right? And so they're scrambling to figure out who they needed to notify. So the bottom line is have a plan, and it can be anything. And I'm going to go through some things that'll kind of give you an idea if you're a small shop or medium shop, some basic stuff that you can do that'll give us a fighting edge, or anybody else you call for that matter. If we show up on site and you can give us these 5 things, we should be able to at least get an idea of what's going on. And those 5 things are going to require a couple of levels of effort from your company to be able to accomplish, and they're minimal. But we'll get to that. So the top 10 mistakes, or the top mistakes. Now this was called top 10 ways to screw up your IR investigation. I'm going to throw 5 up there and talk a little bit about them. Failure to have a solid IR plan. We just talked about that. Any plan will work, and I'm going to give you kind of an ad hoc alternative to look at and think about. Failure to know your environment. So we've been involved in some incidents here recently even that when we go in, we're asking the IT guys, hey, where's your logs? Do you have sys logging? So, and no centralized logging. Okay, great. Pull all the logs from the domain controller or AD server, whatever. And we go in and look, and it's like, they're not even login failed logon attempts. They haven't even taken the time to go through their environment and say, hey, if we do get kicked in the ass, this is the stuff we want to know. And hey, if we do, let's go ahead and push that stuff off site so that the attacker doesn't just wipe the security logs when it gets in, because we've seen that, right? I mean, everybody in here has probably seen something to that effect. So failure to know your environment is key. I'll give you a really good example of this. It's something I worked on last year for 6 months. And they'll come up again probably later in the slide, but there's a very large healthcare company in the United States that has a kick-ass IR staff and team, right? They have all the money in the world to spend on everything, and I mean, they have dedicated people that do nothing but revise this IR plan every quarter, make sure it's up to date. Every time somebody leaves the organization, they're on top of it. They had an event, or a breach, if you will. It was a crypto ransomware had gotten into one of their vendor-managed, what they would call a peripheral device. So imagine in hospitals all over the United States, their entire IT infrastructure, these guys manage that hands down like an NFL sports team. Nothing, no stone unturned. The problem is they have over like 140,000 devices like pill counters, kidney machines, kidney blood pumps. Pick something. It could be a surgical robot. It could be the item that in the room, if you code, sends the alert to the desk of the nurses to have them run down the hall and revive you. That stuff was not in their IT universe. Their plan did not cover that. So they basically had a third-party device get compromised. While they had visibility of these devices, logically, they didn't know what they were. So crypto ransomware gets in and encrypts this box. It was running a version of Windows. And they're like, well, that's bad. We need to act. Within 14 minutes, that had gone to 31 different devices. Somebody in that IR staff, the gentleman, I know him personally actually, had to make a decision to start blocking ports without knowing if that device was critical for patient care, or if it was going to kill somebody, or if it was going to just be a pill counter, right? So he made the decision and killed all 31 patients. I'm kidding. No, he killed all 31. He killed all 31 devices. One affected patient care in a non-critical manner. Wasn't putting anybody at risk, but it was the biggest wake-up call that organization's ever faced. So they immediately put $5 million aside in 4 years to identify all this stuff, create a framework to be able to implement new devices into the environment. When you got 6,000 vendors selling medical equipment to you, and the vendors don't typically put any security controls in place, it's a daunting task. But first, what we did for 6 months was identify the level of patient care that the device required or provided, and kind of rank that out to determine an SLA of, hey, can we pull the plug on this kind of thing right now if something comes up? Or do we have to give it 24 hours and make sure somebody gets plugged into another machine so his heart keeps pumping? So that's a good example of knowing your environment, right? Another minor example for mid-sized companies would be make sure your backups are running. We come in and on a crypto mining or a crypto ransomware case when they're like, man, we need all our stuff back. Well, yeah, let's go to your backups. Shit, nobody's even checked to see if these things were running for the last 6 months, and they're not. Stuff like that. Logging, same thing. Go in and try to find some logs. They're not there. Another mistake is that corporations and mid-sized companies tend to take an IT-centric approach to malicious activity. If they identify a computer or a host or any kind of system for that matter that appears to be compromised, it's a knee-jerk reaction of the IT staff that's typically in charge of that stuff to run malware bites on it, clean it up. If that doesn't work, wipe it, re-image it, whatever. They get the production environment fixed. They take care of the fear part of that. But then 2-3 days later, somebody's calling us going, hey man, we were hit. We realize now, looking at some things, that this is a bigger deal. It's on 47 computers. What's on these computers is very sensitive. We need you to come in and do a full review. Well, you guys have already wiped all the data that we were going to need. Well, we can get some logs out of Malwarebytes or kind of put some things together, but we're not going to be able to hash it, sandbox it, tell you exactly what flavor it is and who did it and all that stuff. Because you don't have any logs, we're not going to be able to see ingress, egress off your peripherals, off your firewalls and your perimeter devices, things like that. So there's a few things that, again, we'll get to that will help out. This is a big one that leads to the last one coming up, is a failure to designate and train first responders. And the primary focus of this, and the thing I'm trying to pound into people's heads, clients of ours, I talk to them about this all the time. And we help them for free to understand what they need to get in place. But basically, somebody that understands, hey, if whatever criteria is determined or is set up to determine if something is compromised, whether it's a virus, crypto ransomware, crypto mining ransomware, or crypto mining malware that's using up cycles on a server or whatever, there is a way to approach that without hurting the production environment at that time, and also capturing the 5 things we need to be able to go in and try to accomplish a very successful incident response investigation. That starts with failure to preserve evidence, right? There's a failure to preserve evidence because there's a failure to designate anybody that even knows what to treat as evidence, or how to treat the host PC that they find compromised as evidence in a way that may even need to be used in court down the road. The Secret Service routinely comes to us on our financial side clients. When we do an incident response, if they're required to report, and we're sitting there with 2 or 3 items of evidence on a major breach. I got one right now, $390 million. No, I take that back. $390,000 fraudulent ACH transfers. The bank was very ill prepared for any kind of investigation that would happen afterwards. They don't know where the people that called to socially engineer the bank they do not know at all where these people would have gotten the 5 criteria of knowledge that a client would have to know to authorize over the phone a $390,000 ACH transfer on a home equity loan. But they did, so they're like, well, it resides here, so it has to be on this, and we need you to look at this and see if we're breached. Well, you look at that system, no logging. It's hosting a third-party, web-facing mortgage application tool. And all their PII is stored on that damn thing. And there's no way to tell. And so talking with the board, who's not technologically centric, trying to explain to them that we're not able to tell you one way or the other that you were breached or not because you're just so porous. Let's just assume you were. Well, their hair catches on fire and they yell at you and say, well, that's not good enough. We need answers. So anyway, long and short of it, these are the 5 things we want. All 5 of these things, although very valuable, only a couple of them require people to do any kind of advanced auditing or just verifying their condition in your network. So we'll start with RAM, and we'll go all the way to logs. RAM, volatile data, and files and hard drives, that's all going to be on a host system. There are things that the first responders need to know to be able to preserve those things when they're dealing with what they believe to be a compromised system. The PCAPs and logs, that's stuff that prior to any first responder activity, prior to any breach, those 2 things, if I could get every client of mine to go in and make sure they have the ability to pull PCAPs and centralize their logging and lock that down so it can't be wiped and make sure that they are auditing what's being logged so that we have the best type of logging available for our investigation. Even if they didn't know how anything happened or if we had a hard time capturing firewall logs, that sort of stuff, or whatever. If there are any difficulties, if we can get these 5 things, we have a fighting chance. So just a couple of free tools for the RAM, Mandiant Redline and Belka Soft RAM Capture. Imagine taking just a hard drive or a thumb drive, throwing a couple free tools on it, training a guy how to use those tools so that once he sees something malicious in his environment, he treats that computer or that host as evidence and he runs one of these, grabs the RAM, runs this volatile data script that either you can find online, you can get WMI scripts, PowerShell scripts. I'm lazy and I don't want to guess first of all, I don't like running host level stuff, right? I like everything to be run off my thumb drive in RAM. I don't even want to start PowerShell on the computer. So I use this what looks to be very simple and is very awesome. It's called a Win Audit. PGE or I'll find it for you. It's Paramex or something is the name of the company. This is free. This thing interrogates everything on your computer in about 2 minutes. It creates a PDF or HTML report. It's easier for me to actually dig through this on site really quickly than even load the RAM image into Volatility and get the same information. I get both in RAM first because this will show up in RAM after you run it. And so I use both because I will use Volatility and some scripts that I have when I get back to lab, but on site I can whip this out, start digging and see what ports are open, what services are talking to what processes are running. If there's any outbound connections to IPs, I can pull those out and geolocate them real quick on site. Files and hard drives. Typically, we try not to image the entire hard drive if we're triaging a couple of compromised systems. We may just want the journal record, the master file table, and a couple other things in the logs. And I can basically load from that thumb drive one of these 2 tools, FTK Imager or Xways Imager, and target the things that I want and get those in 10 minutes versus a 4-hour image of a 1 terabyte hard drive. And I don't have to take the system down. It's still running. I can do this live. Everything I've shown you so far, I can do live. So the system's still in production. If we know it's a bad system, it's completely compromised, we'll obviously unplug it from the network after we run all this stuff, at least the RAM and the volatile data stuff. But that's it. So your guy that is going to be your first responder, those are the 3 sets of tools he has on his thumb drive. You can get a 75, or what is that? 3/5 of what we need to get started. PCAPs. A lot of organizations we come into, they don't have the ability to span a port. They're using consumer level switches. They don't even understand what that is. We have some devices we can just unplug them and go inline and dump these things to a external hard drive. Those are very easy to make or cheap, or I can show you how to make them. But that way you have that capability, but you got to have it first, right, before that incident happens so that you can start grabbing stuff. It's a lot easier if I can call up and say, hey, requisition a span port for me, throw Wireshark on it, give me 10 gigs of PCAPs. But if they can't, like a retail location, a store, a gas station or something, we used to use a little inline box. NetFlow data, if you're a big organization and you have like a NetAmp from Cisco or you got any other kind of NetFlow solution mounted in your rack in the back, that's awesome. But if you don't have it, we got to get down and dirty. We at least try to span a port or drop that inline. That's just Wireshark. Free tool also, so you can grab PCAPs. And logs. We prefer these companies have centralized logging. If they don't, we get what we can. But if I can get everybody on the same page going forward, at least when clients call me and they have one incident, after that's over with, this is the stuff they're doing to prepare for the next one, especially when we can't answer their questions. We say, here's why. But, even something as simple as Event Log Viewer, this is Event Log Explorer, also free. And you can query on any kind of term in there. So if somebody brute forces RDP and it's coming from a certain IP address, and you find one and you just query the one IP address, you get all the failed RDP brute force attempts. And that helps try to answer the question of how this is going on. And we've had quite a few of those come across our desks. So very short presentation, because I'll take questions, obviously, and I can sit and talk to you guys afterwards, and plus it's 4:30 and it's been a long day, so if you want to go home, you can. But the idea behind this is prepare ahead of time with some very simple things. You can always talk to me. I'll be out by the booth after this too, by the way, if nobody wants to talk up here, but we don't offer this as like formal training. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but I'll give you this slide deck and you can just take it back and run with it. I mean, if it'll help. But if you have questions, you want to talk about it, if you're out in the field or you're back at your organization in a couple weeks and you decide you want to start looking at some of this stuff, you can always call me, email me, and I'll be happy to help. At the end of the day, it's all for the greater good. Not, like I said, not trying to sell anybody anything, but trying to make my life easier and answer more questions for clients. Does anybody have any questions? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'll give you the site for that. I've tested it. I've loaded it on a system and sandboxed it, and I do that with all the stuff that I get for free. Make sure that it's not opening back doors for me or doing anything crazy. But that one's trustworthy. They don't offer a MD5 hash on that site though, but you can, if it makes you feel better, fire up a virtual machine, throw it on there and see what processes change, do a before and after diff on the registry, that kind of stuff with red shot, and just you'll see it doesn't change anything maliciously. Yep. Anybody else? Yep.
Best practice approach for a client or endpoint logs?
Man, go out in that hallway. There's about 5 solutions. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, there's all kinds of products that you can even use Splunk. There are people organizations we've gone into that have Splunk deployed, and they offload all that to a Splunk server. That's awesome. Most companies don't do that. I mean, there's 1,000 solutions out there. I try to stay vendor agnostic, but if I were consulting with a client after an incident and they wanted a gap analysis and usually in my reports I put recommendations that we've learned from this incident, how to shore up for the next one or how to shore up your response times and just implement those best practices. I just point out, you need this logging solution. You don't need, or this type of logging solution. I try to stay vendor agnostic. But it's definitely, I'd say it's in almost 99% of my reports because typically they're host-based logs.
But international things like Europe, how do you handle what's the
Oh, internationally? So chain of custody, for instance, and that's actually a good point. Like, so even your first responders, one of the things they'll be trained up on is proper chain of custody and proper documentation of what they've done. So if they go in and they run those tools and they get all those images, they should have a notepad somewhere, even a digital one. There's just notepad up even to just type in, hey, this time I did this time I did that. Internationally, if you're collecting evidence remotely, you mean, or you're going over?
You don't have IT staff over
Yep. So if you're shipping something, FedEx and UPS are approved links in chain of custody. So as long as somebody fills out the FedEx tracking number on that side, and when you get it, I take a picture of it, and then that goes in my file. And then the tracking number, I verify that, and then I sign off that I received that, because there is a record between that person that shipped it to you and you, held by FedEx, that can be subpoenaed. So they never do. If you got a picture of it, they're like, yeah, all right, so it's good. But any more? You guys are exciting. Now, I told you it was going to be a simple one, but I'm going to go back here first.
Doing any incident response on AWS breaches?
Yep, they're a whole different animal. Yeah. So you typically need your own AWS instance, and this is something that would have been a better talk than this probably, but yeah, we can talk about it offline if you want to. But yeah, we do it from Amazon to other Amazon instances. It's faster that way. We just pay for the cycles. We host our own environment there that does that, or that we use for doing that. What'd you, sir?
What's your top handful of things that identify an incident?
Like incident,
What
like indicators of compromise?
typically run into? Yeah. What do you see out
Well,
in the field?
clients typically come to us with a number of things. Right now, the new hotness seems to be O365 breaches. If you're using federated credentials in your environment, spear phishing attack or phishing attack, somebody inevitably, and I got 2 right now in my office that they were both attacked the exact same way. And the common human denominator was, while they were implementing 2-factor, the last person that demanded to be last to do it because he didn't want to be bothered by it is the CEO. And both of these companies' CEOs both clicked on the bad link, gave up their credentials. One of which, a third company we had last week that, they just passed the credentials into 2-factor that was implemented, and it dinged the person's phone, and they're like, oh yeah, boop, 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 and they were in, so gone. But anyway, so they know pretty quickly when they start getting bounce back emails from China saying, oh yeah, the address doesn't exist, and maybe they didn't set the rule up right inside that particular account that they compromised. So what they'll typically do is come in, compromise that account, do their recon, figure out who all the players are in the organization. They'll know the bank president's name, who's in charge of financial transfers, who handles this type of loan, who are the power players, and then they'll go offline and just call them, and they'll scam them, right? Or maybe there's personally identifiable information or account information in those people's emails. One case in one of the banks, they're freely emailing back and forth in O365 applications for HELOC loans, home equity lines of credit. And so all the personal identifiable information is in there. So once you click on that link, you just gave up everything. Like it could, because you had poor data handling practices prior to that. That's just one example. Just think of anything. We had one server filled up one time, and they're like, well, why is this server full? Well, it turns out somebody was hosting a bunch of porn and games and stuff on it, and wares and stuff, and they just filled it up. And that's how they found out. There's 1,000 ways, plus EDR solutions and other alerts that might go off if they do take the time and to implement that stuff. But is that good? Anybody else? Back there. Ransomware attacks, yeah. Typically all you're doing there is picking up the pieces, telling them how it happened. All the attacks that we've seen, I'd say a majority of the attacks that I've seen over the last 7-8 years has been a combination of not patching your third-party software. Back in the day, there was a case, this is actually kind of a cool thing. I had a case here where it was Crypto Wall 3.0, dropped on a system. It spreads over 445, right? So the file server was encrypted and everything. So we went in and they had a Palo Alto firewall system, and they had logs. And so I put everything together, and it turned out that they went to stltoday.com, a very benign website, and some bad guys had bought Google Ad Space. And in their flash ad, they embedded some code that would interrogate the browser and find out what CVE it was vulnerable to. And then as soon as it found that CVE, it goes, oh yeah, great, that's this exploit kit, bam. And then it goes out and pulls down the executable, creates the public key, and then starts ripping through everything. No kidding. Awesome, great company, great security, but they just couldn't figure out how it happened, right? So that's how that happened. I had the date and time stamps, and I had the randomly generated URLs that I used. A week later, I went out to Arizona for a company that everybody sees on TV, and I went in their war room. They had the same situation, and when I got into it, it was the exact same, down to the second, ad and URLs. Because anybody that was looking at it in the United States that day, when that ad flashed up for however many impressions that they bought, and if they weren't fully patched, they got it. So it was kind of cool to see, 1,000 miles apart, same exact tech. But yeah, so basically to answer, to get deeper into that question is, usually the damage is already done. By the time that we get called, they're done. They're like, none of our stuff's working. What do we do? So then it's the backup conversation. And if they have any kind of logging in place, then we can typically kind of explain to them how it happened. If they haven't cleaned everything, because typically they'll try to clean everything, we can at least tell them what flavor or what variant the crypto ransomware is, what campaign. We'll get the crypto currency wallet ID. We'll get some information. Just put a report together that explains to the C-level what happened. We're not fixing it. Unless it's an older, weaker one that's already been popped, and then we can point them to, helping them decrypt that. But that, I think, happened one time since I've ever been doing this. It was like, it was the one that encrypted Xbox video games, and they had broke it, and Tesla something or other, Tesla Crypt or something. But that was it. So it's usually, like I said, picking up the pieces and just explaining to them how they got screwed. Anybody else? I'm taking all questions. Nobody? All right, I got one more.
Do you have any advice on engaging law enforcement?
Yeah, for what exactly?
We have an incident, and where's the threshold, I guess, we're looking for?
Well, it depends on if you have any regulatory compliance issues, and it depends on what happened. So, for instance, the $390,000 deal, FDIC only covers up to $250,000, right? So somebody's head's going to be on a spit, and it's probably going to, everybody points to the person that authorized it, which is like a person internally to the agency. But then it right away, she becomes a suspect. As soon as I say, we can't tell you whether this was an inside job or a breach from outside. We can't tell you because you're logging and your infrastructure's crap. So it could be anything. They're like, whoop, might be her, right? So anyway, at that point, they call in the feds, and then Secret Service, that's their purview. They call the FBI, but Secret Service handles that stuff. We can talk later about what kind of data it is, and I can tell you more, but typically it just depends on your threshold of pain and whether or not whether or not you have a due diligence to call in law enforcement. If you're a privately held company and everybody signed a waiver that you can lose all their money and their information and they can't do anything, then why call them, right? But anybody else? Got one back here. All the time. So even at a level of we deploy on some of these incidents where if we have say 300 or 400 computers, they don't know what's going on. It seems to be affecting the entire environment. We'll deploy Carbon Black, which uses threat intel feeds from SANS and Cylance and Alien Vault and all that stuff. So those made available through that tool set is one thing, and then we have other threat feeds that we can attach to that are subscriber based. But yeah, anytime, especially if we're using an EDR solution to get visibility on a large data set or a large set of hosts, you have to use. So I could sit on one computer and just poke around looking for the anomalies for 2 days by myself, but I need 200 of them done, and I need them done now. And so all that threat intelligence integration, and they're not the only product that does that. I'm not trying to focus on them. I'm saying any EDR or any kind of endpoint solution that does use any kind of active threat feed or any kind of intelligence. Endgame, I've been through all their training. They're great. They do some cool stuff that nobody else does. But any of all the time we use that stuff because, I only got so many people and computers usually outnumber us 10 to 1. So. But anybody else? Who's ready for a beer? What's that?
Maybe not in CVE, so like a 0-day or something that there's really no documentation on.
Yeah.
Kind of like, I still can't explain. I got the data, I still don't know.
Right. Yeah. And when we see that kind of stuff, we might not understand what the exploit was that got the compromise accomplished. But we'll find the ancillary stuff like the communications for command and control outbound. We might find data exfiltration. We'll find some privilege escalation. We'll find all the stuff that happened after. We may not understand the vulnerability of how they got there, but we'll find all the other stuff. And then we backtrack to that and go, well, looks like it might be this binary. And then there's no known, analysis of it. It's not in virus total or anything like that, but we'll hold on to it and see. A lot of these companies, I can't remember which one it is. I know Cisco does it, but anytime they see something in one of their solutions like FireAmp or NetAmp, they flag all those hash values, and if later something pops up on the radar 6 months from now that device has seen, it'll automatically go, hey, you had this last December, But so a lot of those platforms are doing that now, where they're keeping that data. It's good stuff. Was it Cisco? I'm trying to think of the last one. I'll think of it. The last one I saw that did that. But yeah, I mean, some things you're not going to be able to identify quickly, but everybody's got the same cyber kill chain. Everybody's got the same behavior afterwards. If you're lucky enough to catch it while it's going on, you're going to find those ancillary things that are going to tell you that you have a problem. So you get most of the questions answered. Anybody else? All right. That's it. Game over. Thank you.